We are very complex creatures, have you noticed? And that complexity we sometimes try to consider through contemplation and searching inside, but is it possible for us subjectively to look inside ourselves and come out with an objective assessment? And that's highly unlikely. So we have to grapple with that. And one of the ways we grapple with that, as far as the Jewish spiritual tradition is concerned, is we have recourse to the document or the production manual that produced the human being, which we call the Torah. Therefore, we consult the manual when all else fails. And in this instance, the particular area that we are considering and trying to decipher is our motivation. What makes us tick? And one of the interesting features of our motivation is our inner duality, meaning that we basically operate on a two-track level. In other words, sometimes we tend to do it this way, and sometimes we choose to do it that way. Sometimes we decide this, and sometimes we decide that. So it seems to be sometimes fairly inconsistent. We're going to consider in this series where that seemingly inconsistent behavior derives from. And we're going to trace it back to this phenomenon which is described as the tree of knowledge, good and bad. Which is, you know, as we learn as little kids, this tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden. Well, it's not in the middle because the tree of life is in the middle. This is somewhere else, but it's a pretty powerful tree, and of course we're told not to eat from it. Around which one can draw many metaphoric and allegorical insights and truths. But we're going to consider one that is actually the defined one through Kabbalah and Chassidus. What is it that actually took place? And how did that, what took place, affect us in the present tense now? How does it actually explain our duality? How does it explain the nature of the world being one of morality, immorality, positive values, negative values, good and evil, right and wrong, and these descriptive manifestations of some innate sense that there is something we should be drawn towards, and there are things we should stay clear of. Are these environmentally programmed? Are these the product of our cultural antecedents? Is it a matter of our genetic makeup? Or is there something more profound spiritually that seems to guide humanity to the point that even the film industry dichotomizes between good and bad, especially in some of the contemporary science fiction movies of the day? So we're going to look at some of these issues, and the way I want to look at it is fairly systematically. I want to look at some of the source material. I want to discuss some of the source material. I want to be able to read an authentic piece with you, taken straight from the writings of one of the great Kabbalistic masters, and I want us to be able to, at the end of the several sessions, to come to some sort of understanding of our inner motivation level. Now, this is a table discussion, and for that we need to be able to empower you to raise questions right throughout and to be able to make a contribution. So please don't feel you have to remain silent. If I'm not clear, that's for you, therefore, to clarify to me. You know what they say, people who speak in a complicated manner are the ones that don't understand anything. People can speak simply, that means they do understand something. So I'm going to try to speak as simply as possible. Let's have a look at the source material in the Chumash. The word Chumash, which is translated usually as Bible, and related to the Hebrew word chamesh, which means 5, and therefore the Latin Pentateuch, from pent, which means 5 also, is because there are 5 books. And the Chumash has the source material from which this whole evolution of the Garden of Eden teaching came from. And I've just selected some salient verses that we're going to have to consider as we go along. The first one, and Hashem planted a garden in Eden towards the east. The tree of life grew in the middle of the garden, and also in the garden grew the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, first one. So we've got some idea that it's got to do with a growth, it's got to do with something which we can ingest, it's got to do presumably with fruit, and it's got to do with some notion that magically through this ingestion is going to be some change in human nature. Pause. Second verse. Hashem Elokim, and notice the change, by the way, in the subject. It's no longer merely Hashem, which was the first description of God in the first verse, but Hashem Elokim, a double entendre there, which we have to look at, instructed Adam, telling him, you can eat freely from all the trees of the garden, but as for the tree of knowledge, good and bad, you cannot eat from it. On the day you eat from it, you most certainly die. All right, so here we have this direct instruction that we're able to deal somehow in a manner of moral purity with all things that grow from the ground other than this particular tree, because this tree is going to impact you to the point that death comes into being. Cryptic at this stage. We don't really fully understand. Let's go further. And then, subsequent to eating, they were both naked, but experienced no shame. As Rashi comments, Rashi the famous commentator, they were in a state of innocence, and that state of innocence was rudely broken. Okay, what does that mean? What does innocence mean? 4. On the day you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you shall be like God, knowing good and evil. All right, presumably, therefore, good and evil exists out there. Because if God and the angels are familiar with good and evil, and they fear for the human being to be able to know good and evil, it must exist in an absolute sense. All right, and the final verse. The inner eye of both of them opened, and they realized their state of nakedness. Okay, so again, there's a notion of analysis. What does it mean to be self-conscious? What does it mean to experience shame? What is it in terms of what we in the contemporary world will talk in terms of sexuality that seems to have been missing in terms of our relationship to sexuality prior to this event? So this raises a whole panorama of discussion which is going to last several weeks for those who are going to go for the distance. Okay? Now, let's have a look. When you and I discuss the notions of good and evil, what do we mean? Where does good arise from? Where does evil arise from? And let's not use the religious connotation of good and evil. Let's talk about the more contemporary right and wrong, or positive and negative. What determines your personal life's behavior in your assessment to be able to create positive as opposed to negative behavior? What criteria do you have? And how did that evolve in your life? Just cast your mind back and think, okay, I know certain things are right and certain things are wrong, but why do I know them? How do I know them? How do they come into my being? What do you think? Where does right and wrong originate? Is it all simply a facade? Is it all simply an accident? Is it simply living in a particular society? And if a society were to teach us that murdering each other Mondays and Thursdays is perfectly all right to give a sacrifice to our gods, that might be perfectly tenable if we lived and were raised in such a society, which historically seemed to have been the case at various stages of history. Are we that malleable? Are we that devoid of some innate antenna? What do you think about yourselves?
I think it's pretty much an environmental dictation.
Environmental dictator. So it could well be, you're saying, that if we were raised in a Nazi-dominated state where the culture was one of purity of the races, then it's quite possible that we would adopt that particular vantage point.
Generally, I would say that.
Yeah. Okay, seems like a cogent position. Anyone would find another position to take? Or don't you?
Well, this is just a variation of it, and that's the positive and negative, positive reinforcement of parents.
Okay, home environment as being a progenitor of the way that we turn out. Okay.
But then don't the parents have to know? I mean,
yeah, it goes back.
Lineal and recursive.
Yes, it does go back, but nevertheless, we can ask the same questions of the parents then,
right.
and further. But nevertheless, the fact situation might well be, these are our parents, and this is the way that I've been raised, this is therefore what I believe, and that's the way it is. Are we...
Education? Education?
Education, which is another way in which we're environmentally processed. Does anyone here not have the self-confidence of making the preposterous proposition that they would not follow a majority view and be individualistic?
I do. I think it's innate.
It's innate, okay.
You get some people that are better than others.
All right. Laurie?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think, for me, some of it seems to be innate. I can't explain it.
Right.
As you've raised it. So.
Okay, so we've got the competitive views of, I'm not going to say environmental and genetic, because it's more than genetic. We're talking about something mysterious here.
Nurture or nature, the old story.
Nurture or nature. But even the mystery of nature, because why should nature be impregnated with a tendency towards good?
We didn't say that.
No, but I'm saying if it's one or the other, how could they be contrasted?
They coexist. They always have.
Oh, no, that's not even a question. I agree with you. But if we're going to argue and trying to say that there is an innate, Laurie says innate goodness, the young lady says an innate goodness, is that nature? Is nature innately good?
Could be the reverse too.
That's right. But they're proposing that it's positive. So I'm just asking, that's a mystery.
Conscious.
Yeah? It's a mystery. And we are dealing here with a mystery. The whole idea of this tree of knowledge we're going to go to is a highly mysterious, not just allegory, but we're going to say a product of spiritual dynamics, which makes up the nature of the human being as we are today. Okay, the first point. From the vantage point that we're speaking, remember, I'm teaching this subject not from a philosophical vantage point of pure philosophy, nor am I teaching it from a subject vantage point of psychology. I'm teaching it from the vantage point of Jewish spiritual teachings derived from the Torah. And I'm positing that on the table, and that becomes part of your decision-making process then as to how you walk away in life with that information, whether that enriches, detracts, or otherwise. Why is it that we change our mind about things? What dynamic causes us to change our mind? What does it mean to change a mind? I'm talking about very basic things, which we don't ask ourselves. What is it that causes us to change them? What does it mean to change my mind? I used to not like the color of that wall, and now I like the color of that wall. What does that mean? What's happened? What is my very saying of the words? I now like it and I didn't like it before. What is it really describing within? But what does change mean? Now we're coming to basics. What does the word change really describe?
Become accustomed.
Okay, you become accustomed. What is change?
After you reflect on something,
Yes.
evaluate it,
Okay.
make a judgment.
All right. So one of the things that's implicit in what you're saying is time. You can't have change without a flow of time. That's a very important a priori statement. Okay, that's the first thing. What else?
Reconsideration.
Reconsideration. Go even more basic. Without consciousness. Time and consciousness. They're the two elements that are absolutely necessary for change, for the word change to apply to any set of circumstances. We can go one further. And although it's not directly here, it's interesting. What is time? Time is?
A flow.
Keep going.
Our perception of change.
Good. Our perception of change. Time is the relative difference from one moment to the other. If everything were constantly static, there would be no way that there would be movement and change. Okay? I can't understand what consciousness might register under those circumstances. We don't have that set of circumstances, so we needn't contemplate it at the moment. So change means registering how something might be at one instant and the difference in another instant. If that wall remains green, though, what's changed?
Your perception of
something in here. It hasn't changed there, but it's changed within me. So change of mind is a change of my consciousness. Somewhere, a change of consciousness.
I don't understand how the time, you said it is my perception, so it's...
No, I didn't say time's perception. I said movement of time is necessary for the word change to have any application. Without time, without the flow of time, there will be no change in perception. Everything will be absolutely instant, static, no change. But I want to come back here. Therefore, why is it that at one stage of our life we might consider something right and another stage of life wrong? I'll give you a personal example. I spent my early 20s at the University of Wisconsin. It was in the late 60s, early 70s. It was a very, very vibrant, if that's the right description, vibrant period when there was a lot of student unrest, there was a lot of sit-ins at the administrative offices, students took over the university, there was violence between police and students. I remember very well each afternoon there was a little game that was played. The local police came and they threw the canisters of gas at the students who were demonstrating. The students would pick up the canisters and throw them back. It was like ping pong. It was really, really interesting, except if you got your eyes, unfortunately, in the middle of all the gases there, then it became quite painful. Now, there was a very dominant group of students there who were called the Weathermen. Now, I don't know if you ever recall the Weathermen, but the Weathermen were an anarchic group, right? Anarchists. And they felt that anarchy was the right way for society to run. They were very, very committed to anarchy. There was an aspect, the philosophical aspects of anarchy, the psychological aspects of anarchy. To you and me, they'll be absolutely ridiculous. No society could run along those principles. But it was very strongly held by certain individuals who had senior positions in leadership amongst the students. Some of them later changed their minds. And I wonder, how could they have been so committed one day and so differently committed in a year or 2 or 3 or 10 later on? What causes change in mind?
They matured.
But that's again a summary word. What is it? That's a bigger summary word. We need to look at the dynamics within. So let me introduce you to the way that the Alter Rebbe explains our inner conflict or inner dynamics, and why there is duality, and why there is this or that, and how we constantly oscillate between the two. We have two consciousness flows, not one consciousness flow. We have two consciousness flows. One is a consciousness flow that is registering my survival instinct, my ego, my emotional welfare, my physical well-being. Everything that pulls towards me, I need, I want, I must have. Sometimes you can say it's justified, sometimes not justified. I must eat. I must have the Rolls Royce. We use the word must in both instances. Both express needs of certain people. Okay? So there's that direction, inwards. The other consciousness flow is the flow that goes outwards. And that is the flow of other-centeredness. My service of you. My empathy with you. My compassionate repose. These are the two equal and opposite tendencies that the Alter Rebbe says we flow through life. And every moment, whether it's through our eyes, or whether it's through our ears, or whether it's through any aspect of our inner self, we coalesce into this chameleon shape of self-centeredness or other-centeredness. And that's whether with thought, or whether with words, or whether with behavior. Now it's interesting. I mean, there's many ways to look at reality, but this is the way the Alter Rebbe explains from the Torah the reality of the dynamic of the human being, whether it relates to self or it relates to other. The other can be the cosmos, can be God, can be the other person, etc. And self is self-preservation. Think about it now. Every single behavior that you've ever experienced or exhibited, every word that you've ever spoken, can be either dichotomized as one or the other. You open your mouth and speak, and you will know, if you analyze, am I saying this for me, or am I saying this for others? Now you'll say, but sometimes it's quite okay to speak for me. Why do I ask the question? I'm asking the question of Laibl because I'm interested to know. And why am I interested to know? Because I want to grow. Say that's the answer. All right? No one's going to argue with that. That's me-oriented. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with being me-oriented for my personal development? What's wrong with me being me-oriented for my well-being? To which the answer the Alter Rebbe will give you is, it's not the end of the sentence. If you want to be growing as an individual because you simply want to grow as an individual, that's quite selfish. It goes back deeper down, even though it's camouflaged in beautiful notion of personal growth, it's still all about me. But if I want to grow so that I can be a better partner, a better facilitator, a better husband, a better friend, then it's again couched in context of the other. So this subtlety is terribly important. But every behavior and every word and every thought can be analyzed, and that's what he asks each one of us to do in mastery practice, whether it is self-centered or other-centered. That dynamic arose, we're going to see, from the tree of knowledge, good and bad. Before that, we were innocent. What does innocence mean? What does it be in a state of innocence? You know, we associate young children, babies, with a state of innocence. Or sometimes we speak about indigenous people in different countries from a point of view of state of innocence until so-called the corruption of the Western world, which often certainly has been the case. What do we mean by the word innocence in those contexts? Is it simply naivety? Is it a matter of lack of knowledge?
They were not exposed.
Not exposed is a reason for it, but what does it mean to be in a state of innocence?
Good.
Again?
Good. Pure.
Pure goodness. I mean, what words can we use to grapple with it? What does it mean to be innocent, in a state of innocence? Uncorrupted, whatever that might mean. You know, we use these words, but we never really think, what do we mean by these words? I think all of us seem to have a sense that a state of innocence is beautiful. And we also think that a state of innocence is probably something that can't be attained. Because once corrupted, innocence is lost, whatever that might mean, whatever context we're talking about. This is what happened when we ate from the tree of knowledge. When we're going to talk about Adam and Chava and what that is. I'm not yet explaining directly what took place then and there, but the result of that, the way we're learning, is that we lost our innocence.
Awareness of mortality.
Not only just awareness of mortality, but real mortality.
Yeah.
That the death didn't exist prior to that event, nor was there the inner tension of other and self. These things are very difficult to contemplate because they're not part of our experience. And yet this was the state of Adam and Chava prior to this particular incident. Since the incident took place, the result has been that it's been internalized. Duality is internalized, and now we have to struggle. We have to struggle in making decisions of right and wrong, good and bad. All these things now are part and parcel of trying to separate and divest the goodness from the badness, the rightness from the wrongness. This is very difficult in our own day and age because we're living at a particular point in history where notions like good and bad, right and wrong are not considered terribly popular. We're a very pragmatic generation. We're at a generation now where basically what we want to say of ourselves is that we're simply machinery, the product of early environmental programming. We're going to say the opposite in these sessions, that we do have an innate antenna. We call it the neshama, loosely translated in English as the soul. And it's not a good translation because the soul has certain connotations, Christological connotations and other connotations, but the idea of the neshama is that it is our antenna. But it is also made up of two flows, the nefesh bahamit and the nefesh elokit. Nefesh bahamit, which ultimately becomes self-centeredness, and nefesh elokit, which ultimately becomes other-centered. And again, I repeat, everything we do consciously has to first resolve that dynamic. You can't move your hand towards the watermelon on the table and eat it without having resolved that. You do it without giving it too much thought, if any thought, because it becomes habitual if you don't practice consciousness and mindfulness. It becomes robotic. It becomes the product of automaton-type behavior. But it originated in something conscious. So if you were to be practicing consciousness now with the watermelon, what would you be doing? Why would you be taking this watermelon?
It's free.
It's free. I applaud the way that you say it so openly. It's good. It's good. No, it is. Yeah, but let's get down to it. You know, why do we have it? It's inviting. What's that mean?
Tempting.
Tempting? What does that mean?
It's for me.
There is a relationship you're developing with the watermelon, right? Mm-hmm. There's a relationship, okay? It's not, that's just watermelon, that's me. You look at that succulent watermelon and saliva begins to salivate, mm-hmm. and then you give yourself all the reasons why you should be the first one to reach across the table and take a piece, even though we're speaking, right? And no one has. So what have you practiced by not so doing? Why have you withheld? For some of you, you've withheld because...
We ate from the tree of life.
Because some of you might have been embarrassed too. No, I'm not saying everyone around the table is like, let's postulate. Someone's been to him. What does it mean to be embarrassed to take a piece of watermelon and eat it here? What would that mean for such a person?
Defying the social norms.
And therefore, because you seem to be defying some social norm, therefore, what's the bottom line? Why are you withholding? So what would be the consequence of defying it?
Concerned about others.
Are you concerned about others?
The opinions and
About
views of
what
us.
they'll think about
or
you.
perhaps that they might want some too.
All right, but there's plenty to go around. What are you really concerned about? If you are concerned about social mores, you're more concerned about how they will see me. It's back to me again. It's not others at all. It's usually about me. That's why if we want to treat states of acute embarrassment or unjustified shame, etc., we have to get to the guts of those kind of things in order to be able to handle that. Okay? So there's something about the tentativeness that will take place, That is directly from pre-Eitz Hadas Tevara, the tree of knowledge, good and bad. It didn't exist. If Adam, pre-tree of knowledge, was seated at this table, he would have reached out and taken the watermelon without any compunction whatsoever. There wouldn't have been even an issue of social mores. There wouldn't have been an issue. There was a state of absolute innocence. If a 3-year-old child were here and reached out and take the watermelon, would there be any social overtones? None, because we say that, it's a child. What are we really saying? Pure innocence. Okay? And it's wonderful to be able to think that maybe we can regain innocence, but we can't. And that's one of the interesting results of this phenomenon.
So when do we lose the innocence?
How do we lose our innocence? Oh, for different items and different settings. If it's an area of innocence in context of social mores, as we've spoken, or is it innocence in terms of thought processes, or is it innocence in the way that we cover our body, or is it innocence in all these different things at different stages of life? You can lose your innocence in some areas well advanced in the 60s, 70s and 80s if the circumstances arise, etc.
There's a fellow that reached across the table to get a piece of watermelon. And the guy next to him says, "What's the matter? Haven't you got a tongue?" He says, "Yes, but my arms are longer."
Good. Okay. Let's look at the discussion points on the second page at the moment. From verse 3, the one that said they were both naked and experienced no shame, we must assume good and evil exists in higher realms. It's probably from point 2 rather than 3, and it's a misprint there. In other words, when it says they'll be like us, knowing good and bad. So what could good and evil be in the higher realm where there is innocence? Let's say angels are innocent, which they are, by definition. I mean, these are creatures that we're defining. And I'm telling you angels are innocent creatures, okay? Let's take that as an axiomatic proposition. And yet, they are able to experience good and evil. What's that mean? Then why aren't they like us, or we like them? I'm going to look at that when I read the source material in the Hebrew. And let me just anticipate this with you. There's an interesting Hasidic teaching of the distinction of the words sovev and memale. Memale means to fill, literally, to fill something, and sovev means to encompass something. We say that the creative forces flow into the universe two ways. One way is it fills the substance of the world, and the other is it creates an aura around the world. Let me give you a more parochial example. You step into an absolutely beautiful building, an ancient building that's 1,000 years old, and it's a public building, and it's got that very fine stonework, and it's got a tremendous dome, and you step inside and you're the only person there, and what do you experience? And the light is filtering through the beautiful stained glass, and you're there, and it's like huge, and you're so small, and what are you experiencing? And usually the word we use is awe, A-W-E. Awe, okay? Now, what is a state of awe? A state of awe means being small in something very big that surrounds you. That's one way of putting it. It may be small as a personality in the presence of a great individual. It may be small as an individual in the context of a beautiful, large archaeological, architectural design. It may be small and big in other ways that you can come up with. But that's the state of awe, as opposed to a state of fear. Fear is something else. Awe is something else. In fact, in Hebrew we have the terms distinguished with yir'ah and pachad. Pachad being the lowest state of fear, and yir'ah being the state of awe. Very often one is mistranslated for the other. Okay, so you have a state that surrounds you. On the other hand, we have a table We have chairs, we have watermelon, we have bottles. They have internal structure. The only reason they're there is because there's some van der Waals forces between the molecules holding them in some sort of structural format, and there's atomic structure within, and there's subatomic particles that have a relationship to each other and creating some shape. There is some forces operating within to be able to give internal structure. Mamela is the way that the creative forces flow through matter and through the universe to maintain structure, provide shape, provide substantiality, corporeality. And then you have Sovev. Sovev is the way that these creative forces also surround us in an encompassing way where we only have a sense of presence, a sense of mystery, a sense of, even words start to be lost. You can't describe it. You just simply know that there's more than what meets the eye. More to it than meets the eye. This rather strange and radical kind of activity we call living. Mm-hmm. That's Mamela and Sovev. Up there, at the angelic realm, it's very clear and separate. Everything is separated. Good is here and bad is there, and I can look at each like in a state of awe. In other words, I recognize this and I recognize this, but ne'er the twain shall meet. There's no mixture of the two. When I look at the watermelon, there's a mixture of the two, because I can want that watermelon because I begin salivating because my taste buds are starting to operate, and that's because I have a certain relationship to the watermelon, and I want that watermelon, and therefore I have to ingest it to satisfy some internal need, whatever that need might be. Okay? So I don't know, am I eating rightly or wrongly? Am I eating egotistically, or am I eating as a result of gluttony? What am I doing? Which one is it? When we eat, when you eat, which one's dominating? Do you eat because you want to help the food? Not directly. Do you eat because you want to help society? Because you have to be strong, you have to be healthy, you have to be well. Or do you eat because I'm hungry? That's also not bad, because you can't help society unless you satisfy hunger. But do you eat because it's an escape? An emotional escape? Or do you eat because of nervousness, tension, or otherwise? Then I'm eating purely egotistically. Okay? These things have to be understood. See, for us, it's a decision. Angels don't have that problem. They know when they eat, whatever eating means to them, that they're eating for good and not for bad. Why? Because it's not mixed up. For us, it's mixed up. We have to start separating in our minds. Why am I eating? Do I have the right to kill an animal and eat it? Who gives me the right to do that? Do I have the right to kill a plant and eat it? Who gives me the right to do that? Do I have the right to walk down the path and pick a leaf off the tree? Who gives me the right to do that? See, these things are mixed up in us because we've ingested from the tree of life, from the tree of knowledge, good and bad, I should say. Okay? So that's what we're saying here. Look at the third point. The Kabbalistic image of a lizard in a palace. It's a very interesting picturesque image, a lizard in a palace. The lizard can coexist with the palace goings on and no effect on either. Whereas for the human being, the knowing of evil means its consciousness is always there. The lizard can live in a palace, and for generations there could be kings and queens and what have you, and the lizards and their descendants have nothing to do with the kings and queens, and there's no interconnection. That's the relationship of an angel in relationship to good and bad. Bad can exist, but it's a lizard in a palace. We see there's something quite different. It has nothing to do with me. Not you and me. You and me, good and bad coexist within. We have the dual tendency, the dual track, and we have to keep sorting it out. Why am I thinking this? Why am I saying this? Why am I doing this? Am I doing this to satisfy me? Am I doing it out of personal fear? Am I doing it out of insecurity? Am I doing it as a contribution to society? Am I doing it because I love you? Am I doing... These are things we need to constantly sort out, but it requires sorting because it comes from a mixed place within. Or the Kabbalistic metaphor of house and food. One is encompassing, the other internalized. Both house and food services us, but differently. One is internalized, and the other one, we are part of it. It's external to us. So this is another way that Kabbalah speaks in terms of this phenomenon of being directly related to it or not being directly related to it. Eating of the tree of knowledge internalized the tree's spiritual makeup, mamala, admixture of good and evil, and by consuming it, it becomes consciously known within. What does it mean, known within? We know what the right and wrong. We know what's good and bad. What does it mean to know? So we just want to make one more little side trip into Hebrew, and that's the Hebrew word for the word to know. What is the Hebrew verb to know, the infinitive? Lada'at. Now, what does it mean to know something? Where's the word lada'at, the verb lada'at, first occur in the Chumash? In a very strange setting, and Adam knew Eve. Come on. How quaint can you get? What's the matter? Is the Torah being very coy and shy of using explicit language? Is it going to be banned? What have you? And Adam had sexual relations with Eve. No, Adam knew Eve. Why that turn of phrase? But it's not just a turn of phrase. Whatever sexual relationship is a subset of the Hebrew word knowing. To know something means to be absolutely at one with it. For example, if I ask you what is 7 times 6, and all of you will immediately say 42. How come you say it so immediately? Because you know it. But what do you mean you know it? It's in there. You even, without using mental registration, you can say 42 when I say 7 sixes. Why? Because it's not a matter of calculation anymore, it's a matter of knowing. To know something means it is you. There's no distance, there's no separation. That's when you can really say, I know something. When it comes out of you because it is you. Adam knew Eve means much more than sexual relations. It means at an emotional level, at an intellectual level, at a spiritual level, at a physical level, it was all momentarily in a state of oneness, which is the ideal in terms of human interrelationship. And that's a problem because in our society we've separated sexual union from all the other dimensions. And that's caused all sorts of ripples of problems within relational contexts. Love and sex doesn't have to be overlapped at all. Oneness doesn't have to become part and parcel of it. But then it's not the da'at, the knowingness that we're talking about here. When it says Adam knew Eve, now, that's what we're saying about known. Good and bad is known within us in that sense. It's intimate. It's part of us. It's within. And everything we do is an expression of it. It's already mixed up within. The verb to know, lada'at, means to unite two opposites, or, as Rambam Maimonides proposes, the capacity to distinguish one thing from another. I want you for a moment to turn to the very back page and look at the diagram on the very back of your notes. Okay, take a quick look. Okay, hands up those who can see the old lady there. Hands up who can see the young maiden there. Okay. Can you see them both at the same time?
Not at the same time.
No. You may quickly oscillate from one to the other, but it's impossible to see it at the same instant.
Yeah, that's right.
Why? Because we're dualistic creatures. We're either on one track or the other track. Can you think of two things at identically the same moment? I want you in the same instant to think of and picture a white horse and a black octopus, but in the same instant. Impossible. Can't. You can quickly oscillate between one and the other, but that's amazing. Why can't we? I mean, it's part. Why can't we? And the answer is, because that's the way we've been programmed. We've been programmed on a duality track. And that dual track means we can either be on this track or that track. And that's got to do, again, with the tree of knowledge, good and bad, that our duality entered into the reality of our consciousness. Eating of the forbidden fruit now destines the human being to constant internal struggle to always see the beautiful lady rather than the old witch. And that's like seeing the cup half full rather than half empty. And that's to being able to recognize all the green lights of life rather than being a memory laden with all the red lights of life. How many people do I bump into who tell me, oh, you know, today I've got only red lights. You know why? Because you never notice the green lights. You know, there's, in the course of a period of time, it should be around 50-50, okay? Should even out as time goes on. But most people claim, no, in every part of my life, I've had a really, really tough time. I've only had obstacles, I've only had difficulties, etc., etc. Now, objectively, there may have been challenges, but it's our reading of the challenge, the dual track that we apply to the challenge. Which way are we looking, as the Frierdiker Rebbe used to say, are we looking through the right eye or the left eye? The right eye, he said, is the eye of chesed, outward, other-centeredness. Left eye, self, looking within, gevurah, chesed and gevurah. Okay? All right. I'm going to read and translate from this original writing. I haven't got it in English for the simple reason that it hasn't been translated. Okay, so it only exists in the Hebrew. And I'm just going to show you how a Hasidic master summarizes everything that we've spoken about in the last 55 minutes or so. I'm going to read little sections of it, not all of it. Mashakosov, from the points that are enclosed in the indicative lines, the half brackets. Ha'adam ha'ika echad mimenu ladas tov v'ra. And Adam can become like us, distinguishing between good and bad. And that's what God said to the angels. We have to be very careful to make sure he doesn't eat from this tree of knowledge, good and bad. Aval mikol makom eino me'uravim zeh bazeh, but they aren't, prior to Adam's eating, intertwined, good and bad. Ki golui v'yadua shezeh tov, because it was known to Adam before he ate what was essentially good, v'zeh ra, and what was essentially evil. Umuvd al hara min tov, and good and evil were in completely separate states, and you could easily pick out one from the other, and one wouldn't have any thought of going to the evil because we're in a state of innocence. Even though it's clear that there exist such things as good and bad. Which is not the case once they ate from the tree of knowledge, good and bad. Then good and bad became inextricably interwoven. Evil started to be able to draw its succor from the good. And the good from the evil. And it became intertwined in a new state of oneness. So we have to try to understand. The tree of knowledge, good and bad, surely that's about knowing. Isn't it? He raises the point. We're talking about a tree of knowledge. And isn't it ironically that if you eat from knowledge, that's when you should be wise and separate the two. And it's the contrary. We're told to eat from the tree of knowledge. If we eat from the tree of knowledge, then it'll be all mixed up. Why through knowledge should there become this admixture? It comes from the fact of knowing. It exists above. Gamkein. But there, but the difference is, it's a difference between the encompassing and between the inner flow. Up there, they can distinguish good and bad because it's all in a higher state of encompassing, and therefore one circle has nothing to do with the other circle. ולכן יכול להיות הבדלה בין טוב ורע, and therefore you can have a distinction between it. שיודע הרע ולהכוונו. You can understand and recognize bad and not be turned by it, not be in any way changed by it, not in any way be corrupted by it. And you wouldn't be then doing anything contrary against good. Okay, that's one little section. Then I'll go for a little escapade into the second section, and then I'll come back and summarize. This is not the case once we talk about the tree of knowledge, good and bad. It means that it flows through us. It's not separate from us, so we can identify it separately. And good and bad become, as I said before, interwoven. And that's what Adam became. Okay, I'm not going to read furthermore in this, because all I want to do by quoting from this section is to show you that there is a spiritual literature that deals with the subject matter that we childishly read as kids as a nice anecdote that teaches people that there is good and bad and always choose good as opposed to bad. And really we're talking about a very, very complex cosmic overtone, the result of the behavior of Adam and Chava. Now, the point that was raised earlier we haven't touched yet, we'll touch in subsequent classes. Why did death ensue? It says before in the quotations that don't eat from because you will die.
Surely die.
Yeah. And
they didn't.
Yeah, and they didn't, because that's not what it means, that they'll die on the spot. It means dying will begin to take place. You begin to die now from the moment of birth. Right? From the moment you're born, you begin to die. Mm-hmm. For some, it takes 60 years, some 120 years, etc. That didn't exist beforehand. Adam and Chava were created as eternal, concentrated sets of consciousness. There was not going to be any such notion as death or anything of that at all. You and I can't begin to understand that, and the possibility of that, and the dynamics of that, and the biology of that, and all the other things, because we now live in the world post-pre-Eitz Das, the tree of knowledge. We become totally acculturated to the results of that. So the purpose of today's session has been merely to introduce us to the fact that there's complexity here, that the seemingly allegorical portrayal in the Chumash in terms of a tree and fruit. And by the way, as you see in the opening statement, that fruit was not an apple. Nowhere in Jewish literature does it allude to the fruit being an apple. Somehow that arose in non-Jewish thinking and became a classic piece of artwork, especially amongst the Renaissance artists and others, etc. It wasn't an apple. If you look at the Talmud says there are several possibilities. It's not clear. Some claim it was a grape. Others claim it was a fig, and others claim it was wheat. But whatever it is, no one says apple. Okay? So you can just dismiss that one for the time being. The point being here that we're talking here about a relationship between the human being and the act of living. And the way that we actually comport ourselves is because you and I are constantly trying to define and to be able to separate off the elements of right and wrong. And that's where we'll leave ourselves at the end of this session, just having introduced what this pre-Eitz Das might have been all about, and we're going to look at this much more closely in another way, in the process of Tohu and Tikkun next week. In other words, how do we fix up what Adam and Chava messed up? And whether we've been given the capacity to fix the whole thing up and return the cosmos back to the state of what it might formerly have been. And that's what generally is called loosely out there in contemporary writers tikkun. I want to practice tikkun, and it's become a metaphor of just doing good deeds. But the word tikkun means specific spiritual insight on how to deal with the world by creating self-mastery. Any questions?
How was being printed without Rashi? Rashi script, I've never seen it without Rashi.
This edition, about 10, 12 years. Yep.
I'm still getting confused with innocence. Did Adam and Eve have no notion of other and self?
No.
Didn't, or they did?
They had the notion of other and self. There was an Eve, there was a Adam, there were trees, and there were animals, and there were things, etc. Separation existed, right? But the idea of misuse of the world, or that some way I could be confused and make an error in terms of usability of the world for my needs, that didn't exist. I was there as a shepherd of the world, and I would never be able to do wrong. I was there.
So then why, if somebody's in that state of mind, so when, for instance, when they had sexual relationship, it was
a completely,
because
you can't begin to, it was not, I won't say functional for the purpose of procreation. We're not talking about that kind of pragmatic. There was all the emotional overtones, and there was all the processes of mind, emotion and soul that brought two into one, and the delight of the oneness, with none of the issue of shame or negative connotations. Being naked had no connotations whatsoever, no sense of acting in any way that's unbecoming or contrary.
What motivated Eve to eat? If she wasn't...
And therein lies the third session.
Okay.
Who was this Nachash? Who was this serpent-type person? Because it wasn't a serpent. It was a humanoid creature. And we have to discover what this humanoid creature is and what the dynamic there was.
What is the meaning in Hebrew?
Nachash?
No, not Nachash. Yeah.
Kamo Adam. Dmut Adam.
That's new.
Yeah, you live and learn. Any other issues that arose?
Sorry, go on.
Why would they want even to be intimate if they were in a state of complete innocence?
Because being intimate is a beautiful, wonderful thing that's not contrary to innocence at all. In other words, just the way that they ate food, they had sexual relations. It was a wonderful, beautiful thing. Do you enjoy eating watermelon? Yep. Do you enjoy being in a state of intimacy and oneness with Chava? Yes.
And you could have done it innocence.
Laibl, did they have a sense of time at all?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
And were the children...
Because there was constant change, because everything was in a state of change. Everything was changing. There was day, there was night, there was movement, there was dynamics, and that's what it means, time. Time means the measuring of the rate of change of things.
But we're told only a few more hours and it would have been Shabbos.
Yeah. You're raising another interesting midrash that says it was all in the first day, that after their creation, Adam and Chava created, they were told that you're not allowed to eat from the tree of knowledge, good and bad, for 12 hours, for one day. And in the last hours, they couldn't hold themselves back. Ever since then, we've been dieting.
What was the tree of life for?
What was it for? I mean, I can't answer you. I don't know if there's an answer. It's like asking the question, why creation at all?
What was it? I basically don't know much about it.
No, neither do I.
You do have
Absolutely.
these trees, and with very loose, if no distinction drawn between them.
Yeah, you have trees, and then you have these two trees.
And there's no explication of the tree of life in this text, whereas there's sufficient explication. This whole session today about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
That's true for everything in the Chumash. If you read things in the Chumash, there's very little ostensive explication. I mean, if I were to look at a phenomenon, a mitzvah called tefillin, well, how do you know tefillin have to be black? How do you know they have to be boxes? How do you know they have to be sewn like that? How do you know they have to have parchment? How do you know they have to have the 4 parashas in it, etc., etc.? How do we know anything? And that is exactly what the dynamic of receiving the Torah was. Moshe Rabbeinu went up on Har Sinai, as we read this week's Sedra, and he received the Torah, and he received a 40-day personal tutorial, as did the Jewish people, and they recorded all that, and that recording, mental recording, became known as the oral law and the explanations. It's saying you teach anyone, you do explanations.
Well, there was a recent movie, The Tree of Life, with Terence Malick, which I do recommend to everybody if they watch the Academy Awards.
Yeah.
And it has a whole story of the creation embedded within it. Yeah.
It could well be. Probably not as authentic as this, but not bad at all, okay? What else? Well, I mean, it's not subjective because...
Just kidding.
No, you raise a good point because how do we know anything?
That's in itself a good question.
And the point is, any subject matter, any discussion, any words have to begin with an axiomatic proposition. Right. And without an axiom, you can't have any discussion. So everyone in this room can have a totally different vantage point on life and the subject matter, and that's legitimate. But if I want to know what the Christian vantage point is, what the Buddhist vantage point is, what the Jewish vantage point is, what the secular vantage point is, what the philosophical, what the psychological, then I have to work within certain axiomatic boundaries. Otherwise, why we call this psychology and call this philosophy or anything? It's got to be some boundaries. Otherwise, there's no way we're even talking to each other.
I've also found it, along with the lady here, that there's never any commentary that I'm aware of about the Tree of Life.
Oh, there's a lot.
Okay, there is? Okay.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, certainly not in Bereshit, let's put it that way.
Not in the actual central text.
Not
no.
in the original text.
As I said, you would probably find that 95% of Jewish life
it's a mystery.
Is
for
not...
those who don't study Talmud.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe I'm going to bring you one present to detail that.
He's going to give you a present. Okay.
I studied that with Ralph, I think. It took 17 years.
Any other thoughts? Yes.
I'm just a bit confused about the subject of time.
Ah.
We said before that time doesn't exist in the spiritual world. How do we know, like you said that now I see it a little bit different when you said about Garden of Eden, but so I'm a little bit confused if you can.
Don't be, because it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary to ponder on it. Time itself is a very profound notion. And the fact that, and I didn't say it here, I said in another session that in the next spiritual realm, there's no notion of time as we understand it, but it's a spiritual antecedent to time, and that's taken back various levels also. But I'm not sure that we need to be concerned. It doesn't impact us at all. I would say put it out of your mind.
Can I make a comment on the question of time?
Yeah.
Right. When the physical world was created, physical quantities were created. And there are two types of quantities. What's called fundamental quantities and derived quantities. Examples of fundamental quantities are time, mass, length, temperature, electric charge, light, electricity. These are fundamental quantities. Derived quantities are defined in terms of fundamental quantities. So if you take two fundamental quantities, length and time, you divide one by the other, you get the speed that you drive a car, kilometre per hour, kilometre measurement of length, hour measurement of time. So the quantity, derived quantities defined in terms of fundamental, but the fundamental quantities are undefinable. We accept they exist, we use them in everyday life, we assign definitions to the units of measure, right? We're given definitions in the Torah units of measure, but the actual quantities themselves, we don't know what they are. And I can expand that as well.
Okay.
Are you a scientist?
Engineer.
The most important exercise for you to carry out this week is do the right thing and not the wrong thing.
Not just for this week.
Try it, you'll like it.
Always try.
And the simple way of doing that is ask yourself the question, am I doing it for me or am I doing it for you? It's as simple as that.
And what's wrong with doing it for me?
What's essentially wrong with it? It runs counter. It's like saying, from my vantage point where I'm sitting, it's like saying, I want to surf the wave, but I'm going to do it on top of a stone. I'm going to use a stone and not a wooden plank to surf the wave. You just won't get where you need to get. Somehow, the nature of purpose of creation is related to goodness, not badness.
Why is it necessarily bad?
You're right. We could, ask, you're absolutely correct as a matter of logic. One could go around, for example, I often ask a person, why do you think something's evil? Why do you think that if a Nazi decided that he gets his kicks out of throwing Jews into an oven, what right do you have to impose your vantage point? Just because you don't happen to believe you to get kicks out of that, what gives you the right to stop the Nazi from doing it? And then we reduce everything to that kind of reductionist argument. You are absolutely correct. I could not prove the Nazi wrong. Problem. Have to ponder that one.
She's not arguing for unmitigated self.
No.
There's extreme cases that I'm talking about.
Yeah, but everyone's got their extreme. For one person, extreme is to eat 5 extra calories.
You decide, for example, want to do some physical activity and you're doing it for yourself. Well, what's wrong with that? If I'm going to the gym or I'm going for a swim or walk.
Because it can lead, if it's for that reason alone, it becomes self-indulgent and it makes you a poorer contributor to the welfare of others and the meaningfulness of relationship, which ultimately in our tradition is the meaningfulness of relationship that becomes the most important factor in our life, not our own individual welfare as such. It's our individual welfare in context of relationship. In other words, if I'm not working at my maximum, then I can't become in states of oneness with a separateness around me. So it's you're right, it's just a position we take. Another person will say, no, I've got one life, 120 years, I'm going to do it, I'm going to get the best out of it, and I'm going to do it for my own, and my credo in life is personal enjoyment. I can't disprove that. I can only say from this disciplinary vantage point of knowledge, we say that the proper approach to riding the surf waves of creation is to be other-centred rather than self-centred.
But aren't you really saying, ultimately, it's a question of balance? Because going to the gym, which you're doing for yourself, is also building up your body so that your body can have others.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what I say. You see, it's not balance alone, it's what the ultimate motivation is. You can go to the gym and you can press those weights and you can go on the treadmill and you can sweat it out, etc. Two people. One does it because I want to go out there, I'm using extremes, I want to go out there and show everyone what a beautiful body I have, and the other one does it because I really want to spend a long time in healthy, contributive life. Both are doing the same thing.
Yeah, the state of mind.
Yeah, it's your intention. It's your intention. What's your intention in any activity in life?